The development and training, oh my gosh, this has just been one of the toughest time ever, right? And the last thing you think about is training, but this should be on top of the priorities. You know, you cannot leave your employees untrained. How can they sell things in your organization if they don't get trained? And I come back to training because absolutely training is one of my pets. When I see organizations spending thousands and thousands of pounds on advertising and marketing, it drives me insane, right? They spend thousands of pounds on marketing and they don't actually spend any money on training, right? Marylen, are you with me on that one? Yes, give me 5. Okay, so please stop spending money on advertising and spend a budget on your training. And, you know, I love that quote from Richard Benson who says, train people well enough so they can leave, treat them so well that they don't want to. And that comes back to the key of that employee's experience, of creating a journey, of connecting with them, of showing them that you care. If you do all those things, you can train them, you can spend money on them because you know they're going to give it back in return. And this is so powerful.
Have these leadership skills, they can be learned. Really, I think bringing us together on this call is to give you the awareness and the knowledge of the skills and the abilities that you have that you can leverage so that you can seize these critical opportunities in a time of transition, crisis, but also opportunity. So the traits of women in leadership. So one of the things that women apply more as leaders is recognizing that people development, recognizing the power of investing in people, that women are often not just focused on developing themselves at work, but they actually focus on building the people around them, building up teams. And again, that ties back to what I mentioned earlier, that we have these caretaking skills that we are able to leverage. So people development, we are able to set expectations and we are able to give rewards for the people that we are working with. And we are able to look for role models and to also be able to be role models that we are.
Training and learning often gets put backwards. It's an additional cost. Now, I'm of the school that if we go through a crisis, that's when you invest in their learning. So I was doing corporate jobs during the financial crisis, and even though we were reducing headcount, we actually increased the training, almost double. So we took the quiet time. If we're going to have less work, how can we use it? We cross-trained everybody into different roles. So as we emerged out, and all of these things are cyclical, it's just how long does a cycle last? So we just thought it's going to come back eventually. And when it comes back, we want to be the best placed firm. So everyone is cross-trained. We know the knowledge, we know the systems, we've refined our procedures. And when it came back again, it often comes back with high volume because everyone's been unable to, I guess, buy whatever product for the industry we're in. And you tend to get a faster growth coming out. So therefore, we need to be ready.
It is when you do it not right, when you just do it because of somebody said we have to do it, that is with the BCP, that's with training, with everything, it will be a tick in the box. And if you have a tick in the box, then you don't really solve the problem. You think you have something, but you have actually nothing. So after a few months, you will see what you have done, or actually what you have not done. Yeah, and that is what we have to consider. If I ask people, are you trained? They say yes, but that's not a good question. I have to ask you, what do you still remember from the training? And what can you apply from the training? Because that is more important than I have been trained. Yeah, I have a certificate. My whole wall is full of certificates. But do I have the knowledge to apply this? I don't know. Yeah, yeah. And this is with a lot of things, but it is considered as, oh yeah, we have to do this, so there's a tick in the box. But that's not what we need to do. We need to do it correct. The BCP, the training, you need to do it correct. And again, we do have time now, or we don't have time, but we have the opportunity to do it now from the beginning.
So Cheryl says, in-person communication resembles video conferencing about as much as a real blueberry muffin resembles a packaged one that contains not a single blueberry, but artificial flavors, textures, and preservatives. You eat too many and you're just not going to feel very good. So why do I say this? Because our goal with virtual facilitation is to make better blueberry muffins. And part of that is really about how we shape the learning space in terms of how we structure the activities, but also how we shape the actual virtual space itself. Winston Churchill really pressing it quite a long time ago. He said, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. The same is true with our training environment. There's a very big difference between me talking to you face to face, or in this case, Zoom to Zoom with all these eyes upon you like this, versus if I was walking side by side with you or just in a small little breakout room. It changes the way these things work. Harvard's done a bunch of cool research on it. You don't need to read that now, but it's just looking at, we can actually shape our space to encourage collaboration, to encourage efficiency, to encourage prototyping. What we end up doing changes the way the space is shaped.
What does e-learning mean? You're thinking it's going on a computer and taking a PowerPoint and putting it on a computer. It's actually quite different than that. E-learning is beneficial because of the reasons that I'm listing on this slide. For example, you will have 40 to 60% less employee time in terms of training. The retention is not the retention of the employee, it's what the employee will retain of the training that we give them. It increases by 60%. So what Jaap was talking to us about earlier, what will people remember of the training that we give them if it's just a tick in the box? Well, the answer is not much. They will retain 60% less than if it's on their own screen. Because if they're using either a mobile phone, a desktop computer, or a tablet, they are engaged. It's gamification. And it's the youngsters that will take over our positions in the future. And that is how they learn. That is their generation. So let's give it to them the way that they can absorb it. Because when they do take e-learning, as it turns out, they learn 5 times more. These are not my statistics, by the way. And these statistics come from studies that have been done by companies far more advanced in e-learning programs and technology than we are. But we're embracing this change because we realize that it's the only way to go. The best part that I thought was that every dollar that is spent by a company in e-learning, it results in a $30 productivity enhancement. So just in case somebody was thinking, nah, this is going to be really expensive, I tell you what is expensive. Is paying instructors, developing courses, moving away from your core activity, whether you're an airline, an airport, or a ground service provider. You're not doing, when you're developing training, you're not doing your core activity. You're doing something that is not your core activity. The other thing is that, to add one more statistic to this, I didn't know. Even though I developed the e-learning program when I was at IATA, and I was responsible at IATA for instructor-led training, the fact is that since the last 20 years, so since the year 2000, e-learning has increased by 900%.
Some form of change. And sometimes this is as simple as having a new learning management system. Maybe it's providing online courses for your employees. But then what's the next step? You send them for an online course, and maybe it's free or it's a paid one. But then if we just stop it there, are people going to learn? So can we introduce some structured ways? We do an online course, but then there's a follow-up. And that follow-up can happen internally, Or a good facilitator can arrange follow-up sessions to see, well, how do we implement this? The same way as in person. We're looking to say, you might engage us for one day, but then what's the next step? Because that action needs to be taken for progress to actually happen. We need to start doing things differently. Fortunately, people are changing things, but I still find we're sort of 4 or 5 months behind where we need to be. And what this really raises the question of, what is the future? Now, one of the most sort of overused terms at the moment is the new norm or the new normal. What does that mean? But even though the term is overused, it's still valid from a learning side. Are we all just going to jump back into a classroom? Are we going to wait until December? Probably not. So we need to sort of get comfortable with what this remote training or virtual learning can actually be. And in the future, I think we're going to have a hybrid model. So if I think about towards the end of 2019, we were already working with a number of clients where we were starting to switch things around, where we would do some webinars, and then after a couple of webinars, we'd meet up in person. So the advantage that has is we get the theory out of the way through the webinars, and when we meet in person, then we can apply it into a business case study, into a scenario. So we more facilitate application of the theory into a work-related issue. And what that is helpful for is especially distributed teams across Asia. We don't need to fly everyone around for 3 sessions. We can just, if they've only got half a day, we do a few webinars, which we know everyone across Asia can log into, and then we can fly them in, and maybe they've got half a day with someone like myself, or they've got half a day dealing with other business needs within the office, and it makes the trip more productive and also a little bit cheaper. Learning and blended learning historically was maybe we can read something, we can read the book, then do a classroom training, that kind of mixed, I guess, training strategy for a year. But now we can do it as one intervention. So if we want a leadership workshop, we can do webinars such as this, and then we all meet up in the classroom and we apply some of the theory from the webinars into a real life case study. And that's sometimes a better way to learn the context of what we're actually doing and how we can apply it. So the e-learning side has got a lot stronger. It's kind of what we call a flipped classroom style. And flipped learning is really coming from the educational world. It's been there for a couple of years now. And what that's really saying is you study the books and you give the materials that you might hand out in class, you give that to them before the class. So they can go away and they can read it. And when they're in the classroom, it's all about how we apply that knowledge. Historically, we tended to go into the classroom, and then afterwards we think about what we do with that knowledge. What we're really saying is if you've got a teacher or a facilitator in front of you, that's the time to ask questions. You've had time to learn it. So this is before a class. You might read some materials at home, but we're saying let's do an interactive learning module. So you're already doing it. And then when it gets into the actual class, we're applying the concepts into feedback. So that way we learn it, we apply it, we can ask the facilitator there and then it's in our heads. We're flipping the mode of delivery. We're not weakening the content, we're just changing the way participants consume the content. So when we're in person, which is higher cost and higher value, we're getting more out of that session. Now, the other ways that you can think about it, I do a lot of work in design thinking, and this is a way that organizations are starting to think, how can we improve learning? And frameworks provide structures. So if we're ever unsure of how can we think of new ideas, how can we sort of take something from a problem into an idea, into a potential solution, frameworks help. And therefore, when we look at something like design thinking, it provides a structure for non-design teams. And therefore we can say, well, we need to empathize. So that's going out to our employees and going, how do you want to learn? What do you want to, where do you see yourself learning in 6 months' time? What do you need now? before we go back to place. That's empathize. Then we define a clear problem. Maybe our employees need multiple methods or multiple mediums of training to enhance their development. Then we can ideate and brainstorm and come up with all these ideas. Then we can start to sort of build out, I guess, a training calendar for the rest of the year in different ways. We've got this much online, we'll do some live webinars, we'll buy some recorded stuff, we've got some in-person stuff, and we come up with this blended, I guess, modules or plans for the rest of the year. And you can always test it with a user group. You can take a lot of innovation strategies from the corporate space, from the design space, and really bring it into the learning space to say, well, why can't we brainstorm new ways of training? Why does it have to come from HR the whole time? It doesn't. But whatever we do, it's about agility, it's about speed, it's about being nimble. We don't want to wait 6 months. We don't want 10 layers of decision making to come through. So how can we give more confidence to leadership to say yes, or to buy into it, or to support it, or to, I guess, allocate budget? So that's where sometimes thinking things through, doing some research, talking to employees, all of those things will provide confidence into decision making that allows us to move forward.